This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 120.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Marjaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another video. We conducted an experiment. And by the way, I'm your host, Ramsey Marjaba. And with me is...
Mr. Binayak Nungo.
What?
Or does Binayak Nungo? Binayak is my full name. But
you said what? Why are you swearing at me? Hello, Benny. How are you?
Doing well. Doing very well. And how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited. We did an experiment, you and I, with our guest, Freddy Mangum. And for some reason, I kept calling him Magnum. Maybe not on the podcast itself.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah. So Freddy Mangum, just to clarify. And we did a webinar with him, which we recorded, and now we're posting it as a podcast. And so I hope you guys enjoy that, because we had some people popping in asking questions via chat. I don't know. What did you think of that? I thought it was an interesting way of doing a podcast.
I thought so as well. And you know, there's this picture, like a meme out there in the world of, you know, those ice cream commercials, like those little ice cream billboards where they'll have like two people like having a great time together. There's a little meme where it's like what it's like listening to podcasts, and there's like an actual kid sitting right outside one of these little advertisements, laughing along with the rest of them, but you know that he can't actually communicate with the people in the ad. And so obviously a podcast is, I experienced that when I listen to podcasts as well, and all of you listening to this would as well. But I thought it was really cool to be able to get that instant feedback with respect to what the audience is thinking of what the conversation is, for them to be able to get their questions directly asked, to Freddy, and even to get our perspectives as well was really cool. I actually liked it quite a bit. And it's also a really good way to be able to meet the community a little bit more. And a lot of people already were participating in a lot of the other initiatives that we have. A couple of people that are on the No SE Left Behind board. But I thought it was a really cool experiment, I think.
Yeah. Like I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking to Freddy. So he's not been he was an SE a long time ago. And since he's moved up to bigger and better things, not that there's anything better than sales engineering, but like he has a different view of sales engineering. He's an advocate for sales engineers top down. Like he's a C-level advocate, a venture capitalist advocate for sales engineering. So I just thought that was interesting. And we do discuss how engineers can show their value a little bit more to the higher ups within their company. So, and there's slides attached to this, which we'll put in the show notes as well. So anything else you want to add before we move on?
No, it's a great show. I hope you all enjoy it as much as
All right, let's go. All right, so this is kind of like every podcast we've done, except we're doing it live, and we're allowing for attendee questions, which should make this a little bit more fun as well. But we'll start off, as usual, by asking you, Freddy, who are you and why are you here?
Who am I? That's a question I ask myself often. So I've been in technology for about 25 plus years. Got really lucky to get involved in this thing called networking in 1993, 1994. Started my career as a sales engineer. We were called system engineers back then. And basically was a field sales engineer from the 93, 94 till 2000, 2001. And my last tour duty as a sales engineer was at Cisco Systems.
Okay.
After that, I made a transition to the dark side. I went into product management and marketing and sales and BD. And I've been involved probably in about 24 companies, primarily in the earlier stage. All that have experienced some element of exit, whether it's an acquisition or IPO. I'm presently a venture consultant at a firm called Forgepoint Capital, which is one of the largest cybersecurity venture funds, an advisor to a bunch of companies that are in kind of an early stage to growth stage. And I'm pretty particularly passionate about technical sales. And why I'm here is because I strongly feel that the technical sales profession and craft is highly underrepresented in the C-suite and in the board level. Many of the conversations that I've been involved with, and when talking about driving company growth is centered around, what do we do for top of the funnel? What do we do for marketing? What do we do for sales? And very, 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 very rarely do we ever really talk about systematically, what can we do for technical sales? What can we do for the sales engineers to basically drive influence within the company and impact the business? And this has become a pretty important mission for me, because I think technical sales, without technical sales, you don't make sales happen. And that's why I'm here, to hopefully be able to kind of impart some perspectives of how can technical salespeople increase their presence and gain influence within an organization to benefit the company, to drive growth, and to also benefit their own individual careers.
Right. So technically, why you're here is because you wrote some amazing articles on LinkedIn, which I saw, and I immediately wanted to talk to you, basically ask you questions. I'm not used to seeing someone in the C-suite be so passionate about us lowly sales engineers. So I personally appreciated that. I think Benny had a question for you though. So go ahead, Benny.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I do have a quick question. So you mentioned there's something that was pretty interesting, this idea, and I think you're right as well, that tactical sales, or at least that experience, is maybe not as represented as it could be or should be with respect to the C-suite. When did you make that recognition? Was it relatively early in your career? Was it as you were interacting more with the C-suite, whether it be through your as a venture consultant or otherwise? When did that aha moment happen for you?
No, I was pretty oblivious to the importance of it as I went to the dark side. But I got reminded about the importance of technical sales for a personal story that was very painful, which is I took over a field organization at a startup. And one of the first things that I immediately did was basically looked at the pipeline. And so there was a bunch of opportunities in the evaluation phase. And I flew down to meet with a Fortune 500 company that basically represented about $6 million of an opportunity for the company, which was a pretty big figure. It could have been really monumental for the organization to close that business. And I remember sitting down with a gentleman in a restaurant in Dallas, and I'll never forget it. And he looked at me and said, "Look, thanks for making the trek down here from your California state there." And he said, "I just wanted to tell you that you guys have the best product in the market, but you're never going to win our business." And I kind of just stopped eating my food. I said, "Well, wait a minute, what do you mean? Like, what did we do wrong? What can we do better? We have, obviously taken over the field organization here. How can we earn your trust?" And he said, "Look, it's not about the best technology product. It's the way that you've managed this whole sales engagement from a technical sales perspective. You put some young kid who's 22 years old, who's a security hacker, not a trained technical salesperson. There wasn't really a formulaic process in managing evaluations. And because the way you've handled this evaluation, you've made, the whole team here has lost confidence in your ability as a business to support to support us if you get the business." And that just really highlighted to me the importance of technical sales, right? Without that technical sales professionalism in place, and it wasn't a fault of this young gentleman, he was just put in that role without the right oversight and guidance. It was a $6 million mistake that had a pretty significant impact on the overall business. And that's when I began to say, whoa, wait a minute, we're not paying enough importance into this technical sales craft. And I had it happen again in another company where, there just wasn't the right element of emphasis and focus in and basically overseeing what technical sales does on those critical steps before the close one. So that's when it became pretty important for me that technical sales needs more attention.
Wow. Yeah. So Jose says wow on the chat, and I kind of agree with that sentiment. Wow. People say that SEs don't lose deals. They're like, if the salesperson is good, they can overcome a bad SE or something like that. But what you just said is the total opposite of that. An SE had such an incredible effect on the deal. They literally lost the deal for the sales team, even if they had the best product.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, if you can't have the technical win, how can a salesperson go out and try to close a business?
Yeah.
And the technical win is not just technology, it's also how you manage the process, how can you scale, how, your compliance, there's so much to it. And it's, I've seen it in various organizations where, sales reps Some more than others will even just rely on the technical sales or sales engineer to say, hey, do the demo. Hey, do the presentation. It's like, hey, what the other day, a salesperson, what are you doing then, right? But the technical sales professional, I think, just plays such a critical role. And even in SaaS products, what I've heard is like, well, you don't need sales engineers anymore. That's actually not true. If you look at companies, well, some very large companies in the SaaS space that I'm talking to, what they realize is that just having a freemium offering a product is not enough. When you can then really deploy technical sales professionals to do guided trials, to qualify, to help the prospects connect all these ingredients to make the right recipes, if you will, on how to leverage a lot of these SaaS enabled products, it increases conversion rate. It lowers your economics on acquiring new customers, new logos. So, again, this all points back to technical sales. Really just putting in a very concerted focus and effort, making sure the technical sales professionals have the right skill sets, the right tooling, and the right support at a C-suite to really impact the business.
Cool. Actually, speaking about the C-suite a little bit, and especially with your experience and even as a venture consultant too, where people are always trying to convince you of something one way or another, whether it be rather a reallocation of resources towards some company priority, or perhaps it's for you to maybe invest in their organization, or otherwise somebody might be asking you if they should invest in an organization. Anyways, people are obviously coming to you for you to make some very influential decision. Now, sometimes there's this, I don't know if it's dichotomy is not the right word, but it's usually if you have a C-suite person on a call, let's say for a SaaS solution that somebody is selling, there's actually a pretty strong emphasis not to maybe get anybody or there can be an emphasis not to get somebody too technical for the call, because they might go too into the weeds and they don't want to be or they may not keep it high level enough for a C-suite person, I suppose, or they might say something that's not effective for that particular conversation. But as somebody that's obviously been there at the C-suite, whatnot, but also recognizes the importance of technical sales. How is it that maybe somebody that's pitching to you that may have that technical expertise, what level do you want them to be having that conversation with you at? Do you want them to keep it high level until you ask questions to require them to go deeper? Or I don't know, like how do you kind of see that relationship when somebody is speaking to you that can be technical, but also recognizing that you're at the C-suite?
I think the beautiful thing about the technical sales professional is that it's a really interesting mix of basically the ability to go deep into the how, but also be able to elevate yourself into the what and the why. And there's an old mentor of mine at Cisco who taught me that, when I was 28, 27 years old, which was a very long time ago, I would get very, very much into the how and want to get into the minutia. And, one of the things he taught me was like, a prospect is not, they want to know the how to mitigate the risk, but what they really want to do is they want to determine value, right? So it's important to kind of tie those how pieces to like, what are they getting and why you versus the competition. And that the effective technical sales professionals I've seen really know how to balance between the two. It's almost like, it's context switching based on your audience and being able to go deep on the how, but establishing that credibility in the how and being seen as a trusted advisor in technology then lets you kind of move up the stack, if you will, on the what and the why.
I'm curious about your thoughts. I feel like when SEs are trying to cover the how, they're not in control of the conversation. When they're trying to cover the why, they are in control. They're leading the conversation, trying to understand why the customer. I don't know. Do you see something of that effect, or did I misunderstand what you were trying to say?
Yeah, you got to be careful to go down the how, and I think it comes back to guiding the conversation to value, right? There was one deal I was involved with. It was about $80 million. This was actually when I was at Cisco, and we were up against a pretty big competitor, and they started asking questions about like, tell me about XYZ feature in your data center switching gear, and all the SEs there immediately started going, defending the performance, and I was brought in kind of more as an overlay of consulting engineer. And I said, hold on, pause for a second. Let's back up. What's your business model? What services are you trying to enable? Because then that'll determine whether we may be the right vendor for you or not.
Yeah.
Right. And be able to then flip it a little bit and kind of have that conversation of like what business they're trying to create, and then understand the features that they needed, and help contextualize the how in a frame that mattered to their business, versus immediately getting into a feature function defensive posture. That just takes you down rabbit holes that is very difficult to get out of.
Yeah, exactly. As long as you're talking about how you can do something, you're not in control. You're not even trying to understand why they are asking you to do that.
Correct.
All right. The topic of the discussion for today, although this was like fairly interesting, and I could have kept talking about this for maybe another 30 minutes, was how can an SE gain more influence within their company so that they're not the person they're asking to just do a demo or just answer some technical questions?
Yeah, I think there's 6 components, and there's a slide deck on this on my LinkedIn profile that people can pull. But there's 6 components that kind of surface for me, and I actually can't take full credit for this analogy. I'll give this credit to a gentleman who's on the board of multiple companies. He's been a CEO for a couple of public traded companies, and he really created a really, I think, accurate analogy using drawing parallels to technical sales to football, which he basically said, your technical sales professionals they're like your running backs, and without them, you have no running game, and without them, you really can't win the business. Yeah. But they're, and to me, like, just pulling further on that analogy, I think there's number one. I think as a sales engineer, as a technical sales, you have to understand kind of what's your position in the field as a company. In other words, is your company really in a position of landing or expanding? And where do you spend your time, right? Because if the company has a very clear, if they have a very clear mandate, and many companies right now, because of COVID, are moving more into kind of a defensive posture, where they're moving to like, how do we just really expand into existing accounts and defend our turf, and that strategic direction kind of will create a focus of where technical sales professionals spend their time on. So just understanding that, I think, is really, really important. The other one component, the second piece, is really understanding your teammates and having kind of a macro picture of what's going on with your business, right? Like, again, if because of COVID, if top line quotas have been adjusted down, by 20% or 30%, or in some cases even 50% or more, just having a little more moment of reflection and looking back and saying, okay, and empathizing, okay, with what does that mean for the head of sales, right? What does that mean for the CFO? What does that mean for customer success? What does that mean for marketing, where budgets are kind of being contracted? And just understanding a little bit of what they're struggling with to determine how you can add value, right? So for instance, if you say, hey, based on my field experience, I think we can potentially get more opportunities in this expansion in this vertical. Someone like in the role of marketing may really, really appreciate that. So just understanding how to frame your insights to all those other personas, I think, could be very, very valuable.
So on that note, like, a lot of people come to me and say, hey, how can I help? Not just me, like some people go up to their managers, hey, how can I help? What you're saying is that instead of doing that, because now the manager is going to have to think of ways to make it useful. If you come up with ideas that would actually help, that will differentiate you from those people who are coming. Like, yeah, sure, it shows initiative that you're asking how can you help, but it shows more initiative if you tell them, here's an idea that we can do. What do you think? Is that
correct? So exactly. So as an example, let's say you were influential in closing a deal, Q1 of last year. And through that engagement with that now customer, you built a relationship, and you're still seen as a technical trusted advisor. And maybe you're able to get insights on, hey, there might be an expansion opportunity within that account, or we might be able to get referred to this other account. And because what I've typically experienced is that the prospects or customers tend to share a lot more with sales engineers than they do with salespeople. And I think just being able to at least bring in a nugget or two and be very specific and intentional on how you can assist just makes you that much more valuable.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, sales engineers definitely are in this unique position to be able to, I don't know, just get more information, because everything you just described, you don't have that, somebody mentioned the right word for me, but I forget what it is offhand as well. But there's almost a preconception about a salesperson, that's going to guard certain facts from ever reaching them from the prospect. And And yeah, you're obviously hearing things from different customers too, as somebody in pre-sales, where you're hearing what maybe a competitor information or information about competing products that you may not hear about, maybe just as a salesperson, or maybe just when you're speaking to a smaller number of accounts. So being able to take all this information, take all these insights, and share it with different stakeholders around the organization. At least speaking from my experience, and which has been pretty small so far, it's pretty crazy the value that as a sales engineer or somebody in pre-sales, technical pre-sales, the value you could bring to your organization is pretty huge.
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore. I mean, I've heard it over and over again from so many prospects and customers that they've trusted the technical sales to be more authentic and more genuine, right? And the wiring of sales, technical sales professionals, it's not strictly coin operated. The compensation models are not 50-50. There's some variable, right? There's larger base than variable, but it's just the wiring of the technical sales folks seem to be much more of just truly trying to be in service of the prospect and the customer to help them select the right product and technology for their needs. So I think that goes a long way, and I think it's recognized largely by the potential buyers.
Speaking of that, I told the story last week. We had Chris White on, who's on this webinar for at least a few minutes. Hey, Chris. And we had Scott, a colleague of his. And I told the story that we were at a customer site. We were doing a discovery call, and my sales guy at the end of the call said, "Okay, what else? How can we help you?" And I like that sales guy. He's one of my favorite people. And I moved companies, met the same customer, and they told me that pissed the customer off. Just asking what else. Although I have asked that same question a million times, as a sales engineer, I'm there to help. He's there to sell. That's the difference. Although we can both help customers, but yeah, I get that we can add value in terms of being with the customers a little more. Right, so point number 3, I guess, of the 6 things to elevate your value based on the PowerPoint presentation that you provided and Benny provided to everybody. Inches or yards. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, just like football, right? You can identify plays and you could try to go for a couple of inches, or you can try to go for the big yards. And I think as a technical sales professional, when you think about how you can help your company, you should think about where can you move the needle on the most, and be able to offer that as an area that could potentially assist the company either drive growth or preserve its existing customer base. And that could be something as simple as hey, there's some ways here that we can automate the way we do the demos, or there's some things here that we can automate the presentations, or here's some things we can do to improve and streamline evaluations. So it's just really a matter of kind of being situationally aware of the environments, dynamics within your organization to determine, out of the 10 things that we can potentially do here, what's the 1 or 2 that will gain the greatest amount of yardage, if you will.
Okay. What about your thoughts? Maybe not to play devil's advocate, but obviously, making the greatest impact you can. That there's so much that can be said for that. Now, what do you think, though, about also, at least in the long term, making a big impact, but in order to get there, maybe needing to make a whole bunch of small incremental impacts? So let's say, kind of taking an example of, I think it's the British cycling team that used to be garbage, let's say 10, 20 years ago. And then they brought in a new trainer, a new head coach that essentially said, hey, we're not looking to do anything revolutionary here. Pun not intended. But what I do want to do is just look at maybe what small 1% incremental improvements we can make to the team, whether it be I don't know, anything from the maybe how the bikes are stored to obviously training practices, whatnot. And then eventually all these little 1% incremental improvements kind of cascaded to eventually making it an extremely large impact, where all of a sudden they're winning gold medals, world championships, things that were unthought of just a couple decades ago, if not beforehand. What are your thoughts on that? Or would you say, always try to make the biggest impact right away?
I think those incremental micro improvements are supporting actors to the big, to the big boulders, if you will, to the big areas where you make those improvements, because the time is basically is fixed, right? So you want to be able to identify the big boulders that will potentially drive the greatest yardage, and then break those boulders down into those incremental micro improvements.
Makes sense.
To be clear, that cycling team painted the insides of their cabinet white just so they can see if there's a speck of dust that might cause them to get sick, and they traveled with their pillows and mattresses. So those 1% increments are like, they're also huge. But like if we stick to the football analogy, even if you go 3 feet every down, every play, 3 feet, is it 3 yards? Sorry, 3 yards. You go down 3 yards. That's every four downs you got the first down, and you're trying again and again. So that every 3 yards added up to being a whole field in the end. So those small differences make a change. And Gary Keller of Keller Williams, he says that most successful people don't get bored from doing the mundane. These are the small increments. Right? Those are able to stick through doing the mundane stuff, that things that add little by little, right?
Yeah, and I mean, to me, I interpret both of those points that you both made as really just building the discipline and the good habits, right?
Exactly.
But then really determining where do you apply that. And oftentimes what I've discovered is technical sales professionals have insights that sales, marketing, product, customer service, and the C-suite just don't have. I mean, I've experienced technical sales professionals having so much insight on what needs to be done with product because they're in the field every day with prospects, right? Versus a bunch of folks sitting in an ivory tower, or I would say an office, but I guess now I could say virtual office, right? I'm making assumptions. And I think that the singular point I would make is just, as technical professionals, just trust where you think the company can gain the most, and vocalize that in a way that can land with the rest of the organization. Don't be shy about it.
So you haven't been an SE for a while, like since 2000, right? Since the year 2000.
I have not been an SE for a while. Correct.
But you've been like at the high level, venture C-suite level.
Correct.
Do you see what sales engineers do as a C-suite person? Do you have any idea what they're doing, or are you dependent on other people telling you, or do you nothing?
Sort of, right? So there's certain things that are black box. You can't just rely data on Salesforce, or I should say pick out Salesforce, but just you can't rely all the data that's in a CRM system, right, to kind of gauge performance or areas of improvement. But at the C-suite, you're always looking at what levers or knobs can I adjust in the business to drive growth, to improve margin, to improve profit, and ultimately to improve enterprise value, because you're ultimately accountable to your shareholders, right? Your outside investors and employees, to maximize shareholder value. And I think and I just really feel strongly that the knobs that a C-suite has at their disposal, leveraging technical sales, they're really unknown, and they're overlooked. I think, to answer your question, in some organizations, I have been fortunate enough to work with certain really strong technical sales leaders where they have their own instrumentation. Granted, it may be in a Word document or their own Excel spreadsheet on their laptop or Google Drive, but at least they're able to provide some element of like, oh, wow, here are some things we can do to improve performance. Whereas in others, it's a complete black box.
Okay. And so what else can SEs do to change that black box mentality, get themselves more visible to the C-suite, and hopefully improve their careers?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great segue, which the fourth point is really about perform, right? I used to, when I played football a long time ago, I used to have a football coach who said, you want to be lucky, but luck is about preparation, meaning opportunity, right? And I think as a technical sales professional, you really want to be able to contextualize your current technical skills that you have, and then be able to assess in the technical skills that you need to develop, and also understand the sales capabilities you currently have and the sales capabilities you need to develop, and then capture your performance metrics, right? If you're not keeping a score of your wins, of your conversion rates, then who's going to?
Sure.
So it's really, I think, important to tie that together for yourself, because it's almost like, I'm going to switch sport analogies here, but it's almost like the baseball cards of baseball players, right? I think I think it's good for technical sales professionals to start kind of keeping a track of that, not waiting for necessarily to update the LinkedIn profile or when there's a career shift, but just really have those kind of quantifiable metrics of like, here are my notable wins, and here's been my typical conversion rate. I mean, I remember talking not too long ago to an old colleague of mine who's been a sales engineer for 25 years now. And I asked him, I said, how do you manage your performance? I'm just kind of curious. He said, what are you talking about? He's like, I got my Excel spreadsheet, and my conversion rate from eval to close to tech win is 92%. I'm like, that's really cool. How do you know that? He's like, I keep it. I've been keeping tabs of this. I said, who else knows that? He's like, what do you mean? It's like, no one. I'm like, no one else knows that? That's a pretty notable conversion rate. Right. So it's just, I think just keeping track of that, I think is really important.
So about that, like for the first year and a half of sales of my career as a sales engineer, I closed pretty much every deal that I had in front of me, but only to find out a year and a half later I sucked at it. Right? I didn't close it because I was good. I just closed it because the customer wanted to buy anyways, despite of me, not because of me. But if I were to do that math, I had 100% conversion rate.
Yep.
How can someone go beyond just the numbers? Like, what does it actually mean? How can I tell? Like, I had to start a podcast in order to figure out that I suck at stuff. Right? If someone doesn't have that luxury, and they listen to the podcast, but still, how can they figure out what they're good at, what they're bad at, and improve?
So there's a thing in the venture business, I guess you could call it, or the company building business, of this concept of just being intellectually honest with yourself. Like, I don't know if you've all ever watched Shark Tank, and you'll have certain entrepreneurs there that you could just see them during their pitch that they're in a bad business, but they just can't let it go, right? They're just too emotionally attached. And I think that also applies to to your own performance, right? So you have to be really intellectually honest with yourself, okay, of you're looking beyond just the numbers. So to your point, if you had a 100% conversion rate, despite yourself, because the market was there, the product was great, but then that's why you have to look also at the intangibles of what are my skill sets, my company, how does that compare to others in my industry, and just really continually be intellectually honest about yourself, of like, where do I really stack rank in the cohort of my peers? And that requires removing the ego and just saying, like, if I was to be outside in, how would I look at myself, and what are some of the areas to invest for my own career, for my own professional development?
That's pretty good. Yeah. So go ahead, Benny. I need to process this.
Fair. Yeah, I do have a quick question with respect to tracking in particular. So you do have on your slide deck there, I believe it's slide 11, some metrics that people can, start to use perhaps to keep track of their successes. So, what's the ratio of how many deals have you won versus what you lost? So kind of how does that compare to your quota? Maybe the overall size of all of the maybe all the ARR that's coming in because of your touch and whatnot. I guess in general, how would you, or I guess for some people, they might though argue that, as a sales engineer, you're coming in for a demo, you're coming in maybe to provide some value in an RFP or something like that. What's the actual impact of those activities? And so how do you measure that, or how do you measure the actual impact of the sales engineer in particular? Or is it to be said that, them being a part of the team, and I think it's going to differ too with what relationship you have with an AE. Is it a one-to-one or one-to-many? But I guess for the SE in particular, perhaps in a one-to-many situation, how do you measure that impact that they're having on their deals, as opposed to, a demo is just a demo?
There's a lot in that question. So let me kind of try to unpack it a little bit. I think the first thing, as it pertains to kind of keeping track of your individual performance metrics, right, whether they're numerical or non-numerical, it's really ask yourself, if you were to, for your next job, right, when you're applying for your next job and you're being interviewed, what are the top 2 or 3 questions that will be asked about your performance, right? In sales, it's very straightforward. One of the first things you look for in a sales rep is, did you meet or exceed your quota? And if you did, why did you exceed your quota? And if you didn't, why didn't you exceed your quota? right? Because again, you don't want to hire someone that's 100% of quota, but they were just in the right place, right time, but they're a really bad salesperson. At the same time, you don't want to overlook a salesperson that only did 50% of the quota, but they just had to be in a product that just wasn't working or what have you. But despite that, crushed it, right? And now think of the person interviewing you for your next gig. They may say, okay, what kind of technical sales professional is this person? Are they a high velocity person? Are they a named account? Are they enterprise? Can they do complex evaluation management? Are they more of like a burn and churn? Like, do they do like 20 demos a day, or do they do like one or two of them? I want to be able to kind of help that person contextualize, what you're about and what your performance metrics are, and connect the dots for them of your strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, no,
right.
fair enough.
So that's one piece. I think as it pertains to the business, that's a whole different conversation. And one of the presentations I gave, there's this notion of sales efficiency, which is a metric that folks like Tomas from Redpoint Ventures have talked about, where in SaaS-centric businesses, you're basically looking for certain per unit economics of, what do you get out revenue-wise, and versus what you put in. And there's a lot of analysis on sales efficiency of all these different personas in the funnel, marketing, sales, what have you. But there hasn't really been a lot of analysis today done on what happens if you improve sales efficiency in technical sales. What happens if you give technical salespeople more training, more tooling? Maybe that's the right lever to invest in. Maybe it's better to invest in that than it is to buy a, predictive analytics tool that, grabs your Salesforce data and tries to give you a probability conversion. Why spend 150K on that when maybe you spend 150K in getting your sales engineers trained, right? Or teaching them how to do a better demo. And those types of conversations are not being they're not being discussed in the boardroom or C-suite. And that's where, to me, that's why I really am passionate that technical sales people need to start bringing to the forefront and saying, look, if you invest in us, we might be able to move the needle for you more so than investing in yet another marketing tool.
No, that makes sense. I think it's kind of goes hand in hand too with kind of the growth of sales engineering in particular, or at least like this movement rather to do with sales engineering, where obviously sales engineers have been around for quite some time. But I don't know, I was introduced to We the Sales Engineers, relatively recently in my overall career. And there's other, sales engineering groups and whatnot, and initiatives and trainers and whatnot, Chris being on the call today, being a big one. And so it's kind of cool that I think a lot of people are starting to, even sales engineers themselves, are just starting to really understand the impact that they can make within an organization. And to quickly maybe, fall back on something you mentioned a little bit earlier about how, more or less under how you, you only live one life, right? So try to make the biggest impact you can overall in that life. I mean, yeah, that's 100% right in that we're all human in the end, and there's really nothing holding you back other than you, I suppose, to do these really big things. And so if you think you can make this impact in an organization, even if you are, just a lowly sales engineer, you're just coming in, you do get all this knowledge that allows you to have that type of impact. But you just really need to believe in yourself truly to be able to make that. And it is possible. So I think that once more people are doing that, more executives too will kind of see that real impact that can be made. And then, hopefully more investment comes down to the technical sales side of the world so that they can overall grow their numbers.
I'll tell you what I'm seeing. I just had a conversation with a CEO not too long ago for a SaaS company, a well-known SaaS company. And one of the things that they did is they said, look, we invested, we ramped up our SDR investments, right? We ramped up our sales investments and in dev. And they had it was like a 10-to-1 ratio. Right. And they were like, well, let's just keep spending more money in marketing, more money in SDRs, more money in programs, more money in sales reps. And they started having some flatline issues with their growth. So one of the things they experimented with is all of a sudden they started investing more in technical sales, and their growth started picking up. And they realized that they don't need to invest as much perhaps on marketing or SDRs if they invested more in technical sales, because they could improve their conversion rates. Right. So by going a 5-to-1 or 3-to-1 SE to AE ratio, you could cut down on those SDRs, you can cut down on tech stack, and you don't have to spend as much money in marketing as you once did before. So it's those types of realizations that I think are often overlooked when technical sales, or the importance of technical sales, is overlooked. And I have yet to be in a technology sales company that doesn't have some element of technical sales. not to say that I mean, I'm sure there are companies out there that they don't have them, but I personally have not experienced one. There's some element of technical sales, and I don't see that importance declining. My perspective is it's going to do nothing but increase, because there's so much. As a buyer, you have so many abundant choices that, there's marketing was only going to get you so far. You need to assess the value of the technology, and you need to have someone that you can trust to help you with that.
So
Yeah.
And that's a technical salesperson. Sorry, go ahead.
We do have a question from Jose, and he's saying it's hard to start the change happening from the ground up, right? To get the C-levels to understand that they should invest in more SEs and all that. What is it that we're supposed to do? I think like we're talking about it today. This is how to prove your value. You're not going up to the top and say hire more SEs. You're proving that SEs are worth whatever they're paying and more, so that they can hire more SEs. What can SEs do in general?
Yeah, I think this was kind of the thing. One of the things that was an impetus for me to start writing about this is really, I think, pointing to different sources. The challenge of going to management and saying, hey, you need to spend more on tooling and training for my role, typically gets a reactive response, right? It's almost like, oh, you just want me to spend more money, or you're just not getting enough certifications, versus, again, going back to empathizing, like what is that management struggling with right now? And if you can go with them and saying, hey, look, what if we went there and invested more on streamlining presentations to demos, or sorry, improving our presentations and demos? What if we could increase our conversion rate from to the next stage of the funnel by an extra 5% and 10%? Would that move the needle for you? And if so, I can come up with a proposal for that, which, I think would probably, come back with, hey, we need to invest in X, Y, Z. But it's really about contextualizing the expense relative to the value. Now, that person may very well say, hey, look, you know what? I'm not even interested in presentations demos right now. I'm just trying to keep people employed. Right? But then that gives you an opportunity to double click on that. Okay, well, where are you trying to keep people employed? Like, maybe there's something we can do on that front. And are we trying to keep employed to hunt or to farm? Right? And then so it's really kind of qualifying your internal constituents to determine where you can add value.
You're basically being an SE to your company, right? You're trying to solve the problem. So be an SE, basically.
Be an SE to the company. Identify the pains and the needs, and then map value. And you're the technical, you're the value key.
Yeah.
Correct.
I guess it all comes down just. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, just another question that came up about slide 7. You're talking about sales skills, like being able to talk about to qualify opportunities. A general concern for SEs is that we shouldn't be talking about money. And is that what you're talking about here, or are you talking about something completely different? Ability to qualify and disqualify opportunities, demonstrate and sell technical value.
Yeah, you're talking about the play to win slide?
The perform slide 7. Luck is in preparation. Luck is preparation meeting opportunity.
Got it. Yeah, opportunity is, boy, I've seen oftentimes sales reps move quickly to the qualification phase, and just to drive and push the SE or muscle the SE to move to a demo or an evaluation, just so they can show activity. I've seen that happen, and there's always a contention. I've seen some element of contention, some more than others, where the technical salesperson doesn't feel that even if you did an evaluation or even if you did a demo, that there's going to be something there. And I don't know if you'll have experienced this or not, right? Because a sales rep has to always show activity. That's the mindset.
Yeah.
So when I say really kind of qualifying opportunity, I think it is up to the technical sales professional to say, are we really going to get an impact here? Because there's an opportunity cost, right? Oftentimes the technical sales professionals supporting not just one rep, but a multitude of reps. And it's about kind of how to manage. If you think of yourself as a resource, there's there's typically a capacity limit, and you want to deploy your resources to maximize your output, not to be. It would be atrocious to get yourself involved in an evaluation, as an example, that you know in your heart of hearts you're never going to win.
Yep.
Right, but the salesperson is just pushing it to show activity.
Right.
So the qualification thing is important, and then and it's also just important again to reflect your opinions and capture it and document it, just so you can kind of have that source of record to reference on to see whether you were right or weren't right, and be able to use that as a data point to then socialize that with the rest of the management at some later point if it's necessary.
So we're not talking about money. We're just trying to see if we have a technical fit with whatever the customer wants. Okay, got it. So SEs don't talk about money unless you're a technical account manager. That's something completely different.
Right.
I do want to move on to points 5 and 6, and then we're going to ask questions from Jeffrey and Neil and whoever else puts in their questions. I want to thank everybody for actually asking their questions. So what do you mean by play to win?
What I mean by play to win is not just about winning the technical evaluations and the demos and the presentations, but really all your activities that you perform as a technical salesperson ultimately translate to that sales efficiency metric that I was mentioning, right? There's certain companies that have higher sales efficiency metrics versus others that has a direct impact on the enterprise valuation. So in other words, simply put, the less it costs you to acquire a customer and the more you can acquire versus the other company, the higher enterprise value you're going to get. That's why companies like LinkedIn may be valued higher than than a company that it's really has to have a lot of heavy lifting to drive their growth. And knowing how you fit into that whole go-to-market funnel, knowing how you can help improve the overall efficiency of the business, I think is really important. And that's what I mean by play to win. It's not just win at your own micro level of contribution to the business, but also how you play at a macro level to the business.
Right. If you keep playing on your own micro level, you're not going to change or gain value within the company itself. You're just going to gain value within your team. Whereas if you're helping the entire company speed up like the sales efficiency or improve the sales efficiency, is that when the value goes up? Do I understand you right?
Yeah, I mean, here's another way of thinking about it, right? A sales professional may be able to, it has a quota, right? Some fixed quota that's attributed to their own success, whether it's $1 million, $1.2 million, $1.5 million, whatever the number is, right? A technical salesperson that touches anywhere from 3 to 10 sales rep has influence over 3 to 10 sales reps quotas,
Yeah.
right? So one highly proficient, highly skilled, highly enabled technical sales professional with the right tooling can impact potentially not one quota, but maybe 5 to 10.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by playing to win, is understand kind of your role and your impact across the whole organization.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Huge. Actually, then the last point, and actually maybe speaks to one of the questions as well. So we have already talked a little bit about keeping score and maybe keeping track of all your metrics and whatnot. Neil, though, had a pretty good question, and I know that's maybe not in order, and there was a question before that, which we will address as well after this, just because it's related to tracking. But what would you say the ideal bonus structure would be, or how would you structure or maybe recommend an organization structure their compensation plan for an SE? Is there, obviously keeping score, maybe what scores are more important to keep than others? And just how would you recommend a company structure that full program?
Oh boy, I don't think we'll answer that question in this particular session. The answer is it depends. It depends on a multitude of factors. It depends on company stage. Are you a startup in high growth, or are you a mature company that's in a defensive position? Are you inside sales, commercial, enterprise, named account? I've known people that tie bonuses to a pod. When at one point when I was a SE, my variable was directly tied to how my the one salesperson I supported, how we performed, right? But then I switched to a comp where it was like done partly regional, partly national. I do know of some organizations that do the variable piece tied to the individual, but also tied to how the whole SE team performs at an aggregate level.
Yep.
So there is no singular answer. That's really up to either typically the chief revenue officer, where they go back and where he or she goes back and forth with the CFO. Because of the usual dynamics that I've seen between CROs and CFOs is usually CROs always say, I need more sales rep, I need more technical sales. And CFO says, no, do with what you got, get more from what you got, or show me the metrics, show me the ROI. So that's where the variable piece plays into that. So the short answer to the question is it depends. There's a multitude of ways to structure it. I don't think there's one singular way of doing it, because it could also vary on your stage of growth, right? It also varies on what behaviors you want to drive. Do you want to drive new logos, or do you want to drive expansion or retention? So there's a multitude of factors that play into that variable piece.
Oh, good to know. Yeah, thank you. Go ahead. Sorry.
Keeping score section, it's meant for someone to like reflexively look in within themselves and keep their own score. It's not meant for the company to keep score about what they're doing, or is it both?
Oh man, I would love for companies to have this level of visibility.
Okay.
That would be amazing. But the reality is, I think that's that's not the norm right now.
Yeah.
So I would encourage individually to keep a score for yourself. And again, think of your next career step. When you're asked by that potential employer, tell me a little bit about yourself. And you can go there and you say, well, let me tell you, I started my career doing inside sales. I typically had a 100% conversion rate, but I didn't really know much back then. And then I developed these hard skills and soft skills. And then I went to this environment, moved more enterprise, and my conversion rate impacted X. And here are some notable wins. Like you just come off with such a level of authenticity and intellectual honesty about yourself that I would bet a donut and a cup of coffee that just having that narrative will outshine you to other technical sales folks that immediately go into, well, I have a CCIE. Let me tell you about widget XYZ. Like, you want to be able to differentiate yourself, right? And having those metrics about your own performance, I think, would be extremely valuable.
Yeah.
One thing that I see is in terms of deals, most of my account managers don't close the deal ever. They just reuse, because we work with the same customers. I have named accounts. They just reuse the same opportunity they had in the past. Like it's open for 654 days. Just reuse it. So I have 100% conversion rate, technically speaking, but that's not actually accurate about what's going on. But yeah, so we're gonna have to figure out ways to actually do that.
Well, and to that point, again, it's important to know that, because then if you're kind of in a named account situation and you're helping just do deeper account penetration, do you really want to be in an environment where you completely got to hunt for new accounts and new logo acquisition? It may require a different skill set, and the person evaluating for someone of that role may want to know, are you someone that has a lot of experience doing a new account acquisition, or more expansion or relationship building? So it's also there's a bi-directional component, which it helps you assess and qualify future employment opportunities, or whether do you want to go into that environment or not. And if you do, understand what you might be getting yourself into.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Maybe also just one quick little thing I want to mention in there too about maybe who you're keeping score for. Is that sometimes you're even keeping score for the company you're working for currently, where perhaps, maybe there isn't that visibility with respect to what value an SE is bringing. And, might just be, unfortunately, the SE's responsibility to show that value, not only in what they do, but very explicitly show, hey, these are the metrics I've been keeping track of. This is the value I'm bringing to your organization. They might just not have that insight to know that, oh, wow, you actually impacted, X million dollars in sales, or you actually made this impact. It's just sometimes not something that they're as aware of until it's actually said out loud or presented in front of them. So you definitely keeping score. There's all sorts of benefits for all sorts of people.
Keeping score gives you a multitude of benefits. One, for your own personal career progression and development. It also can give you value and for future employment opportunities, but it could also give you valuable within your current organization, right? So imagine if you went to your management and say, hey, look, I've been tracking my own conversion metrics. And before I was, in month one, I was demoing, my conversion from demo to eval was, I'm just gonna make up a number, 50%. But then I ended up getting training from from Chris White. I'll just use Chris White as an example, right? I got a training from Chris White, and post that, I saw my conversion rate go from 65% because I realized that before I was focusing too much on feature and not enough on value. And given that metric, I think will further kind of reaffirm your potential to ask, hey, can we get more training? Because you can see the delta here, and maybe some tooling or some SlideShare or DocSend or whatever, some other tooling. But then you're able to kind of quantify the ROI to the people you're socializing internally, right? And it gives you a way to help them connect the dots of expense and output Y.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's definitely proved to be helpful, and yeah, continues to. So yes, I agree.
So usually we jump into the section called the not so fire round now that we've covered all 6 points, but we're not going to have time today. And there's a question that I want to ask you from Jeffrey. He's talking about that deal that you lost early on because of the technical salesperson, SE, wasn't good enough, and they didn't have faith in the company itself, not the product. What were some of the changes that you did so that you don't run into that same mistake again and help you win more deals?
So at another company I've assisted, we ended up making an investment in a very senior technical sales leader really early on in this sales organization. And that ended up leading to closing a $12 million deal. And it was because this gentleman brought in a lot of process and a very methodical approach to managing technical sales.
He was a manager or an individual contributor?
A player coach. He was both a contributor and a manager, but he brought in a very systematic formulaic process of here's how we engage with prospects at the presentation, demo, and the evaluation stage. And making that investment much earlier in that company's formation was proved to be a good decision versus bringing more SDRs and then worry about technical sales later.
So as an SE, as an individual, what can we do to improve that and not like implement some process within our company if the startup doesn't have a process yet?
I think it's, again, try to take a step back a little bit and look at the overall funnel, right? Or ask yourself, are you, whether you're supporting one AE or 10 AEs, try to look and say, okay, what does the SDR to AE to SE ratio look like? What does, and how does that compare to my competition, right? How does that compare in the industry? And is our sales motion such to where, someone as a technical sales professional here, can I get more leverage by getting, having the function of technical sales to be more efficient versus trying to feed more on top of the funnel, either in marketing or SDRs or sales. So I think it's just a matter of kind of taking a step back a little bit and looking at how your sales organization is structured, and try to put yourself try to put the business hat on and say, okay, let's look at, are we landing, are we expanding, are we an offense or defense position, and then let me look at the org structure compared to the competition and in the industry, and just really, again, try to empathize with your C-suite of like potentially what they may be thinking about to see how you play a role in providing enterprise value overall.
Nice. All right. Well, Freddy, this has been awesome. I really enjoyed our conversation. If someone wants to reach out to connect with you, where can they do that?
LinkedIn would be the best thing. Go to my LinkedIn profile. It's Freddy Jose Mangum. That would be the best way to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help anyone out. If they just, I could do whatever I can to help out. Happy to do it. Just ping me directly on LinkedIn. And I can't say enough good things about the technical sales professionals that I've had experiences with across the board. And I think it's a very, very critical role in business. And I think it's going to continue to be in a more critical role moving forward.
Is there any questions that you wished I asked you, or Benny asked you, because I asked you all the right questions?
What does the future of technical sales hold?
What does the future of technical sales hold? That's a very good question, Ramsey. Thank you for asking. What's the future of technical sales hold?
I think the level of influence and importance is going to increase, not decrease, in the future. SaaS withstanding, I've heard the mentions of like, well, if products move away from on-prem and hybrid to SaaS, maybe everything could just be self-serve and you never need a technical salesperson again. And I think that's very naive. I think that's very, very naive. I think there's such an oversupply of technologies and products. I think to be a buyer is very, very challenging these days. And I think the role of a technical trusted advisor is going to continue to become more and more important. And my suggestion to everyone here on the call would be to make sure that you know that and that you make sure that you begin to kind of track what you do and how you influence the company so you can educate others in the industry of the importance of technical sales. And my prediction in the next decade is that I don't think technical sales will be overlooked 10 years from now. I think the market is going to recognize the importance that this profession brings to the business.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, even if you just look on job boards, like I get notifications all the time for sales engineers, and that's just one version of that title. Like you'll see sales engineer, solutions consultant, solutions advisor. There's so many for the same thing. I feel like there's more than ever before, and I couldn't agree more with that sentiment that it'll just continue to grow in importance.
Thank you, Freddie, for your time. Thank you, everybody, for attending. This was great. This is a podcast as well, so it will be published in a couple of weeks. We'll see you guys later.
Sounds great.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you all very much.
And we're done. Thanks, Freddie, for jumping on and having this conversation with us. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the podcast right now. And for those who attended the webinar live, thank you, guys. Thank you, Benny, for asking such amazing questions. I can't remember what questions you asked, but you usually ask good questions.
Likewise. Well, I mean, I have a pretty high standard to have to kind of keep up with. So, I mean, I'm happy that I'm doing an all right job.
What a load of baloney.
No, it's true.
All right. Well, I hope you guys, I already said that. So I just want to bring up the fact that we are doing No SE Left Behind. This is an initiative that it's